The views and opinions expressed by the guests and hosts of this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of the Lansdowne Public Library or its affiliates.
Hello and welcome to the Geek Out podcast,
where we geek out about just about anything. This month, we're kind of doing a bit of a throwback to, I think, our first episode. Was this the first one we recorded? Yeah.
I believe it's been about a year, has it?
So we wanted to revisit what had been our most popular topic of last year, which was, of course, Star Trek.
I tried to remember a theme song. I was like, okay, this is where we put the theme song in. And then I was like, we probably can't do that. And also, they're all melding in my mind at once right now.
I recently heard the Enterprise theme song for the first time, and I regretted my life.
I forgot about that. I willfully blocked that from my memory.
Oh, yeah. Enterprise.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I kept hearing, all these people saying, comments on the internet, oh, it was so unfortunate of a decision. I'm like, really? What could they have done?
Couldn't have been that bad.
Because I still haven't seen Enterprise, but now I've heard the song. They made a mistake.
I think there's only one person who might have sat through it all here. But before we get too far into it, I'm Dave.
I'm Jeff. We're your hosts, hopefully, obviously by now.
And today we have with us, returning to the podcast,
I'm Maria.
I'm Jean.
And I'm Alex.
And now the players are set. So, Jean, I believe you have seen Enterprise. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I did sit through it. And at first I disliked it, but then I kind of liked how some of the stories were really good. But there's the big problem is after 4 years, I still couldn't remember anybody's name. I mean, the characters are just, other than the Captain, Archer, the characters are just so uninteresting. Yeah, you just don't even remember.
I'm actively, here's how bad this is. I know for a fact I have Christmas ornaments from that series that I put up every year. I can picture them, the boxes in my head, and I still can't think of anyone's name.
That's so, I don't know, that's so insane, especially for Star Trek, which is no.
It's such a character-driven show.
Yeah.
Very, very
Got your Neelixes.
Since we're sort of going on a trip back in time, let's go back to just some of the first questions we asked, such as, what first brought you to Star Trek?
Blood. Family. My mother loves Star Trek.
I'm glad you specified.
That's not an it's not an inaccurate description for me as well.
Star Trek. I didn't choose the Star Trek.
Yeah.
The Star Trek life chose me.
Yeah.
I was around when it started. I was a kid, and I never watched it. But when my older sister got married, her husband was a fanatic, and it was in syndication by then. So we all had to start to watch it. I was in my early 20s, and it was a lot of fun. So that's how I got into it. But it wasn't until much later, until my kids started to watch Star Trek and their friends, and then I see everything. I have to watch everything.
Do you really watch everything?
Well, every Star Trek.
Yeah, it would be a little difficult to do literally everything.
Actually, is there a Star Trek you haven't seen?
Have you seen all the new ones? Because that's the thing. There was a point in which I had seen almost everything. Yeah. That point no longer exists.
I haven't seen all the old cartoons from the 60s.
Yeah, the Hanna-Barbera one.
I think there's another one now, cartoon.
There's Lower Decks.
There's two cartoons.
Lower Decks I've seen.
There's Lower Decks and what is it, Prodigy?
Prodigy.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I watched them. But I thought there was something that was more the original show, Star Trek. No?
There was a very old original Star Trek cartoon.
Yeah, that I haven't seen. So I have not seen everything.
That one's a trip.
It's interesting. I remember bits and pieces of that one because it was in reruns in Cartoon Network when I was a kid.
I've seen quite a few of the original animated show, and it's kind of crazy because you can think about them and what they would do. They're all written by Gene Roddenberry, I'm pretty sure. They all have the original cast and some new people voicing. And you get mud and stuff.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like what they would do if they didn't have to pay for effects. They could just animate everything.
Suddenly you have a giant tribble and things like that.
Yeah, and
you can-
everybody's mini.
Right. Okay.
I haven't seen them, but I read some synopses, and it seems like they get turned into mermaids on more than one occasion.
That wouldn't surprise me.
Which, that it happens once is significant.
I haven't seen a full episode of that, but the only connection I have with the original animated was a crossover comic book where the cast from the animated original series meet the Autobots in Transformers. It's an amazing... I cannot stress you enough how ridiculous this sounds, but how amazing it is actually executed. I can't remember much other than the Klingons teaming up with the Decepticons.
Oh my god.
I think they're... At one point, I think Megatron calls Spock a nerd, and one of them, they upload, like, the Enterprise's schematics, so one of, like, the giant Transformer turns into the Enterprise. It's awesome. Go read it.
I think I have that toy. Because there is a transforming Enterprise.
I've seen that. I didn't know it was based off of something.
I also had no idea that was based off something. The only crossover I'm familiar with is actually also a comic, which was the original series crossing over with the X-Men.
Ooh, they've had a lot of cool crossovers, because I think they did Doctor Who as well.
What?
That sounds reasonable.
Yeah.
IDW had the Star Trek license for a while and just sort of ran wild with it, which I kind of love.
Yeah, I want to say, like, I remember, like, Matt Smith and, like, the 11th Doctor and Jean-Luc Picard. I remember that as a thing, but...
I think we have it here, or it's passed through this library. Because I seem to recall seeing the cover while here.
That's how I was able to read that. The comic with the Transformers was through, I guess it was Libby, or whatever the one that doesn't work anymore is. Hoopla, that was it, yeah.
Yeah, Hoopla had some interesting comics.
That was the only thing I could do on a train's Wi-Fi was read that comic, but it was good.
But the question about how do we get into it, my answer is similar to Maria's, though I wasn't going to say it as dramatically. But now I'm seeing that she answered it the right way. It was a lineage thing. Everyone in my household grew up with it, and so it was just expected of all of us to watch it and enjoy it. And it's not like we had to be persuaded to or anything like that. We all really did enjoy it. I grew up when Voyager was airing, so that was the first Saw, although it was my older siblings grew up with Next Generation, and so that's what they would always talk about, and it just became the staple of the genre for us, and so whenever we tried to do any other foray into science fiction, that was the standard that everything was held against, which means not much got through. So
it's a high standard, certainly. There's a reason I feel that Star Trek has survived and thrived as long as it has.
It's interesting because it has just sitting around the table. The age difference here is pretty vast, and a lot of things we would be arguing over which was best. My generations or your generations. But with the Star Trek, I just think it gets better and better all the time. You can appreciate all of them for what they are.
Yeah.
It's so much fun.
I think I said this last time when we talked about this, but it's not to put Star Wars down, but, there are the original trilogy fans, there are the prequel fans, and there are the sequel fans.
Are there?
Maybe. I've heard rumors that they exist.
I think they will be, because that was a big thing with the prequels.
Give it 20 years, and suddenly
kids grew up.
Give it a long-running, very well-made animated series to sort of fix a lot of the problems, and maybe we'll get there in 20 years.
Maybe. But
an argument for another episode.
Yeah. You don't really see that so much with Star Trek. There is a great respect and appreciation, not just among the fans, but among the creators of the show as well. The biggest debate in terms of what Star Trek is good and what Star Trek is bad is possibly between what I've heard labeled as New Trek, which would be all the shows that have come out in the last few years, versus everything else. So not everybody who likes Star Trek has enjoyed Discovery, Picard, and the animated shows. So there might be some rivalry there, but it's not the same as with other franchises. And one of the big differences that really, I think, exemplifies it for me was in the show Picard, how they treated the characters from Next Generation, as opposed to, like, the sequel trilogy, how they treated the characters from the original trilogy. The creators themselves enjoy the work that they're doing, enjoy the history that they're building upon, and they want to pay homage to what came before it. And the fans, I think, can recognize that and appreciate it, and so can continue to love what is being added on to them.
It is an interesting fandom because, you know, there are a handful of absolute purists who will tell you that the only one worth watching is the original series. And they're insane to me personally, but, you know, you have that in any large enough fandoms. You have the odd splinter groups, but, you know, it is an interesting fact as well that the label New Trek, I've been alive long enough to hear that used in regards to the Next Generation, up to Voyager, then specifically Enterprise, and then the movies, the newer movies that came out, the reboot, what was that, Abrams?
Yeah.
J.J. Abrams.
You know, that was New Trek, and now everything in the past gets lumped together as great, and the new stuff is an argument until the next new thing. It's very similar to the Legend of Zelda franchise. The newest Zelda game is always the worst one, other than Breath of the Wild. That's the first one that didn't get that label.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's almost like you have to get used to the new. I mean, it just, like, in life, every change, you have to get used to it.
Yeah.
I've got Doctor Who, you mentioned earlier, it's the same thing. Every time the Doctor regenerates, you're going to hate the next guy. And then, like, I watched the First Woman, and I thought, I don't know how I can take it. And then, you know, you realize it's the same good stuff.
And some of the same bad stuff that you can overlook in hindsight.
And Star Trek, to me, what is nice about Star Trek is it not only just continues, but it continues to try and feed its original vision of inclusion and seeing a future where people are good and, you know, humans have attained a certain amount of respectability and, you know, and with every new edition, I seem to push that the even further future so that we can continue to hope.
Yeah, I mean, even like literally you look at going from the original series to Next Generation, suddenly there are Klingons in Starfleet, who were, you know, the big bad of the universe previously. And then, you know, you get to Voyager, and there's a Borg on the ship, as well as several smaller Borg on the ship who get overlooked a lot.
That's the bit about Star Trek that, like, gets me really excited. That is, like, this is why. This is where the magic is. It is a optimistic space. It is an optimistic humanity.
Yeah,
I agree with, and actually I would want to ask Gene here a question, just because since you've seen the new stuff, I have seen the new stuff, and I wouldn't say necessarily that I'm of the camp that I just referenced that hates the new stuff, but I am still on the fence about the new stuff, because I don't think Picard and Discovery are optimistic.
I would definitely agree to that on Picard's front. Picard is a very bleak look at what normally is depicted as a, you know, perfect society.
Yeah. And that kind of has upset me with those shows. I'm still watching them. I'm behind, but that's not because of anything other than time.
Yeah.
And I do agree that the majority of the reason why it's difficult to get into a new Trek is because of what we were saying before. It's character-driven, so a new cast of characters, you don't know them. But I do feel that Discovery and Picard have missed the mark, if you will, in that I don't see them as being an optimistic future. Would you contradict that?
It's interesting. I do see, I see it more in Discovery, and it's been around 4th or 5th season now.
I think 5 has started now, yeah.
Right. So it took a while, as all shows do. They start off kind of slow, and it does get more optimistic, I think. And the message is always there, that idea that our choices are extermination or acceptance in some way. You know, either we work with these people or we're all going to be blown up. which is an overgeneralization of pretty much a lot of Star Trek.
Yeah.
But that's still there. Picard, I think it's different because it seems like they're trying to tell us a past story as well as a future story, and they're missing the mark at times because they want to bring back the characters in it.
A lot of mistakes have been made to sort of allow for some nostalgia.
But spoilers, in Picard, one of the last storylines, it drives me crazy. I want to see if there's any continuation, because that could change the whole thing in my head, the entire history of Star Trek. So
really?
But no. I don't think they thought of it that way, but I did. But anyway, yeah, I would agree that Picard is not, it seems very different from the other ones, but I think Discovery is going along those lines. And the characters are they're coming into clear.
I think it makes sense too, especially since the whole point of Discovery is just like the start of the building of the altruistic society. Like, It makes sense for that to be a bumpy, not starting off exactly how you want to kind of ride.
Yeah. I would sort of agree and disagree with you.
I mean, that does also kind of, because, I mean, for example, Deep Space Nine has a lot of, one of my favorite sets of episodes is set during what would technically be now the Bell Riots, as they're called, which I think were literally 3 or 4 days ago. It was supposed to be February 2023. And that was all just showing this is the lowest point in humanity. This is what happened to cause people to realize we can't continue like this. And it is kind of interesting to see that, why humanity comes together is just we had moments of absolute horror. It's alluded to with the eugenics wars in the original series and all that. And it is kind of an interesting take that it's like, oh no, this is not a society that has always been this shining beacon of acceptance and greatness. We were monsters, and I do like that it recognizes that in the history of the show to an extent.
Which I think that it might not always be at the forefront of all of the shows, but I think that has always been a part. Because the eugenics wars were referenced even in the original series. So there is the idea of where we've been, but there's this idea of building something new. And there's always usually a high-ranking officer from Starfleet who's still a horrible person.
Oh, yeah.
Ruins everything.
The second you become an admiral, your chances of being likable go way down.
But I don't know, and we don't need to keep talking about this point if you don't want to, but just the idea of it seems like, and I don't want to give spoilers away, but in Discovery, instead of looking back to these horrible things that have happened, it looks forward to these horrible things that humanity will do and will become. I don't know if I need to be more specific than that, because I don't want to be for the sake of spoilers, but do people know what I'm talking about?
I do not. I've only seen the first episode of Picard and the first episode of Discovery.
So
I'm
maybe
very
we
much
shouldn't
not a new track. I have not found the new track.
Well, I will say, I agree. Yeah, like Discovery and Picard definitely have Picard, I think, has just a bit of a trouble where it's bit off a bit more than it could chew. I think the writers are very very over-eager to tell a lot of stories and have them weave together and mesh something, but they kind of fudged it a little bit and ran out of time before they could do it, which it happens.
Yeah.
And I think in comparison, I think what Star Wars is doing right now with like Andor, where they kind of show the rebel movement, where instead of them, with Star Wars, it's like, oh, the rebels are the good guys, and they're always the good guys. And Andor, they're showing, they're the good guys, because the Empire's way worse, but that doesn't mean they're not doing some really underhanded, dirty deeds to get what they want. Like, they're not afraid of that. And I think that's been really interesting. It's really fleshed out, that kind of thing. And I feel like that's kind of what Star Trek is going for. But I feel like in comparison, sort of a counterpoint to New Trek being depressing, well, not depressing, but going for more of a bleak future, I think Strange New Worlds is an absolute, yes, these characters are seeing these terrible things, but here's a guy or, you think And even some of Strange New Worlds gets kind of bleak with some stuff that goes on with Captain Pike. But I feel like they still there's still optimism, and his character in particular has been such a stalwart, like, you know, we have to solve things on a person being level, not black and white, us versus them mentality. And I think that's I think it's good to show that it's kind of a middle ground, although I'd say it's much more positive than...
Yeah.
I'd say it's, in a lot of ways, a return to form.
Yeah. That definitely feels the most like, original Star Trek out of basically anything since Next Generation.
Yeah.
I miss that. I miss that kind of TV. I think that's why I started, like, Picard, and I didn't pick it up, but it was like, it felt like the shows on TV now. Like, it felt like some big drama series, whereas, like, I want a Monster of the Week. I want somebody to turn into a lizard. I was like, what?
I think also, like, Picard especially, even more so, I think, than Discovery, felt too much like Star Wars.
Yeah.
It felt really, really actiony. I mean, there were whole scenes in the first episodes of, chase scenes where people are blasting the right and left as crazy martial arts. Doesn't mean that that's bad stuff. Again, I like Star Wars. I just like Star Wars being Star Wars and Star Trek being Star Trek.
Yeah.
So,
it does get a little weird when those lines get blurred a bit.
Which is, again, I like the J.J. Abrams movies, but they do feel more like Star Wars than Star Trek to me. R2-D2 is even in one of them. In a split second, you can see him in debris.
I agree completely. I'm not a fan of the JJ verse, particularly. Like, they're good movies, but it felt like somebody who wanted to make a Star Wars movie made a Star Trek movie.
With lens
flares. Like, even with, like, the big planet-destroying weapon, and but
jumping from spaceships?
Yeah. And I mean...
That killed me.
Yeah.
It's one of those interesting things, because I feel like, especially for the remakes, and oddly enough, the Next Generation movies, they feel very different than the shows. Like, Next Generation, the film Picard and TV show Picard do not feel like the same character in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, you would think about, like, if you've only watched the Next Generation TV show and then you were to tell that person, oh yeah, Picard got in a fist fight with somebody, I don't know if they would believe you, because that doesn't really seem like TV show Picard. Now, I haven't watched every episode recently in Next Generation, so maybe he does get in the fist fight.
I mean, I only can remember one, and it was when he was younger. It was when Q shows him the flashback of his life, and he gets into that knife fight, essentially. That
doesn't he, like, lose his heart or something?
Yeah, he has a synthetic heart.
So, but in movie Picard has been in a few scrapes. So.
Yeah, like he's suddenly a wartime tactician instead of... Honestly, the show's Picard's primary interests are like archaeology and poetry, and then you get to film Picard where he's just blowing things up left and right, and it's just, this doesn't feel the same.
Okay, but Picard pulling out the Thompson gun and blowing away two Borg goes so hard.
It is very
it's hilarious, to be fair.
I enjoy those movies a whole lot, and even more than the JJ films, I think. They still feel like Star Trek.
Yeah.
They're going in that direction. I think maybe they set the tone, and that's steered the new direction for Star Trek. But I still enjoy these films. I still enjoy the JJ films as well. Not as much the last one. It's just a different direction.
I think one of my top moments of, like, all Star Trek has got to be from the J.J. Abrams movie, the third one, where they have to take out the drones, so they fly the Enterprise with, like, max shields into it. But then they're like, we got to put on some classical music and just start blasting Beastie Boys. That's just like, that's over the top and ridiculous, but I don't know, I feel like it works. There's just certain things about it's like, all right, I gotta give you that one. That's pretty good.
It is one of those kind of complicated things when you're, because you can get away with a lot in Star Wars as far as music and all that is concerned, because it's, nowhere even related to us. Things get really weird when you're working on anything set in the future, because media has always stopped at exactly when you're writing this.
Yeah.
A similar example is, Ready Player One is supposed to be like 1,000 years in the future, but there apparently hasn't been a new movie made since Ghostbusters.
Yeah.
Well, so that's actually one of the things that I do like about the writing of Star Trek. a lot of the things they will quote people who haven't been born yet. Like,
yes,
they will,
which is
like
such a fun little touch.
Philosopher, so and so, and it's like, who is that? Well, he's a 22nd century philosopher.
Yeah.
Or they'll quote Klingon literature, or different things like that.
The rules of acquisition.
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
So it is, I think, just brilliant writing that obviously, yes, there is the hard stop on what is actual history because of when they're writing. And whenever there's a time travel episode, they always seem to go back to time that is filmed.
Or to World War II.
Or World War II.
It's one of those two choices.
Nazis are still big.
Yeah. But they do flesh out the history, their history. I guess air quotes don't work on the podcast.
Not particularly well.
But their history under air quotes, like we talked about at the beginning of this episode, the eugenics war is huge, and we get more and more detail about it as the series progresses. And they do mention these major events, but then they also mention small events, just like I think Cisco talks about times different baseball teams have won world championships, and those are not actual things. And
essentially that baseball as a pastime is just no longer, like there is no Major League Baseball in that future anymore. Like that people didn't have time for it anymore, basically.
Which is nutty to me, because it's like, oh, we no longer need money, and we have like resources and all this technology. Sports? Now we don't have time for that. I'm too busy doing
in fairness,
whatever that is.
It does seem to be specifically baseball. And I kind of get it. As somebody who generally likes baseball, I still will have a hard time if it goes too far into extra innings caring after a certain point.
Is that why Futurama was just like...
Good old Blurns ball, yeah.
Something about the future in baseball getting just like completely...
I like that they, in Futurama, the owls instead of pigeons dotting the streets.
Oh, how did I not notice that?
They said there was an overpopulation of pigeons, so they
released owls
to get rid of the pigeons.
And now every place
there's just
lousy with owls
everywhere.
Futurama is another one we should probably do an episode on at some point.
Yeah.
There's a lot of very good little gags. The fact that nobody in that show will ask a question, it is always acts because of one joke, but they had to keep it consistent after that, is fantastic.
Yeah.
I think that's interesting with Futurama, how much Star Trek.
Oh
yeah.
It's so much fun.
That is a show that has Star Trek in its DNA, to the point that it frequently had characters from Star Trek in it.
And I think that's sort of what the people that did Lower Decks, had that mindset. Only this was going to be legitimate Star Trek.
Yeah, but it's still got that same sort of goofiness.
They name people, they bring people onto the show, and it's just so much fun. And that's like a whole lighter side of it that laughs at itself but loves itself at the same time. It's great.
I love Lower Decks.
Yeah, it's
managed to walk a really fascinating tightrope because it is, in a sense, an attempt to parody, Star Trek as a whole, while still staying consistent with that universe. Like,
exactly.
It's just, here's just the people, and, it makes a lot of sense when you consider, there are thousands of crewmen on board each of these ships, and on average we see like 20 of them. What are all of those other people doing? How are they reacting when the captain gets possessed by a psychic ghost for like the third time this season?
I just think it's probably one of, I think, the best shows out there that's done well with meta humor. It's self-referential, and it gets kind of ridiculous. Some of it's kind of raunchy, but never have I been watching it and gone like, oh, brother. Like, everything is like this. It goes just far enough to be funny without overbearing. It's super referential, so you're not taken out of Star Trek, but it's still poking fun at like things without saying like, without the punchline being, look how ridiculous this is.
Yeah.
It's very yes and not so much just, look at this.
with love.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That makes a lot of difference, I find, because there is absolutely the chance that they produced this show with people who were just looking to make fun of Star Trek and not really, thinking that through to its logical conclusion that the show still has to be funny, and you still have to like these characters. Thankfully, it was one of those shows that I was like, when it was announced, I'm like, I am excited, but very cautiously, because there was a good chance that they just messed that up, and I'm glad it stuck the landing, because it's one of my favorite of the newer shows.
Actually, it kind of, to me, it almost brings them all together.
Yeah.
And you watch them, and some are very dramatic. Discovery is way more dramatic than a lot of them, and, even Deep Space Nine was more dramatic than Voyager, more serious. So then you watch all that, and then you go to Lower Decks, and you laugh at it all. They point out all those, things that are absolutely ridiculous, but in a funny way.
Yeah.
And, so then you can sit back and you feel like you've had dessert. It's
Yeah.
2-course meal,
and now you have that nice little, something a bit lighter, but still on theme, I suppose.
You've had your greens, now here, have the sweets.
Yeah.
Has anyone else seen Prodigy, now that that's officially wrapped up for the season?
I've seen clips. I've been meaning to sit down and watch it, but, there's far too much television and video game and, honestly, just some books I've been meaning to read that just keep piling up.
I've seen them all. You've seen them.
I've seen them, yeah. Well, almost. I haven't seen through Discovery.
No, but I mean Prodigy, though.
Oh, Prodigy, yeah, specifically.
And I love Janeway coming back. That's such a nice feeling, because I really like Voyager. And it's a great kid's show. I think it's a wonderful kid's show. My goddaughter's husband is a huge Star Trek fan, and his kids are 8 and 5, and that's how he's getting them into it. It's great, because it's the same kind of themes, but it's more like a modern-day cartoon, 3D kind of thing. I really enjoy it.
Yeah, I think it's labeled a kid's show, but I'd say if you're a Star Trek fan, it's a must-watch. Because it's taking, okay, this is Trek, you know it, you love it, but here it is through the lens of not Starfleet people, or, which they don't really, as the main focus, that's not usually tackled. It's usually, we're already, Starfleet officers, we already know the code of conduct and what to do. But what happens when you're a ragtag bunch of kids on a starship? Here we go.
We got a little of that in Deep Space Nine with Jake and Nog, but we get to see them go from children to, in Nog's case, a member of Starfleet, and that's always kind of interesting too.
Don't forget about Wesley.
I'd prefer to. But yeah. Well, was Wesley already an ensign when they started?
Not the beginning of the show.
No, because he also had to go to the academy.
He wore that stupid turtleneck.
Yeah, he just looked like he already had a rank because he wore the turtleneck.
And I forget her name, but the child in Voyager.
I was sitting here trying to think of her name.
Yeah, I was really hoping by the time the conversation.
Which of the children on Voyager?
The little girl that was born.
Oh yeah. Because there was that, and there was and there were also the Borg kids later on.
Well, yeah,
Right.
But you get the same idea because she is not aware of any life outside of ownership, and so is learning just how to be a person, just because she's a child and because she grew up in exile.
Yeah. It's kind of an interesting overarching theme in Voyager is people having to learn to be people to an extent. You have the Doctor, of course, you have the 3 Borg who eventually join the crew.
Best Doctor of all Star Trek.
Oh, great.
I want to agree, but Bashir, though.
See, I don't...
He's all right. His relationship with Garrett.
That's the thing, though, is
Best Doctor, I'm sorry.
Is anytime him and Garrick are on screen, I'm like, this is fun.
But it's not because of Bashir, it's because of Garrett.
I mean, to an extent.
That's the relationship.
It is, that's the thing. But, it's much like Quark and Odo. I couldn't pick a favorite there. They need one another to be a complete unit.
I'll defer to you because I haven't finished watching Deep Space Nine. However, I will say I like Quark in isolation and I like Odo in isolation. I do not like Bashir in isolation.
He has his moments. He is a character that does better with others. He also plays very well with Chief O'Brien.
I want whatever they have. One day I just want to have that.
That's
whatever
such a
that
fun
is.
friendship? Question mark.
Oh, it's a bromance, man. It's
and just an interesting. It is one of those things that it's similar to the Doctor. A lot of when you get to look at what makes Bashir tick, he becomes more interesting. Like, the fact that from a legal standpoint, he shouldn't exist. Oddly have that in common, those two.
And that kind of got more interesting when that comes out.
Yeah.
It's but I don't know whether it's Robert Picardo or what.
I mean, again, he's a fantastic character.
And he plays off everybody so well. It's just, I don't know.
And he's so good that when browsing Amazon, briefly saw Robert Picardo in Stargate Atlantis, on a thumbnail, and I was like, oh, I gotta check this out.
I'm watching this now.
Yeah, and I got baited into watching a season of Stargate Atlantis, and I have quit because I found out he doesn't even show up till season 3 or 4. That's how much his character and just him as an actor
has a draw. Yeah,
exactly. I got snafu'd.
I love that about Star Trek. Even though they don't just update, they have totally different storylines.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to watch Deep Space Nine because they don't move, But then I started to it's terrific.
Yeah.
And then Voyager, in a different type, they won't be in contact with stuff, but it's really good. And so all the storylines change around the overall story. And I just think it's great. It's not just a rehash with new characters and stuff. They really put some thought into that.
It's new ideas. What if you may never go home?
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that's so much of Voyager is just that one driving force is we want to get home. Yeah. And so many things pop up where it's, things in the way or an option appears, but is this ethical?
Yeah.
Yeah, the ethics question in all of them.
There are some
Really?
I'm pretty sure.
Some good ones.
There are a lot of big implications. We have both Data and later on the Doctor trying to prove that they classify as human, which is a huge, leap for both characters.
Yeah. And I think, too, they do continually reach new questions, new storylines, and that sort of stuff, but they also, when they revisit it, like you were just saying, there's two characters who have essentially the same journey of what they're trying to achieve, but they do it in completely different ways. They look at it at a very different angle. So even when they do rehash things, you're not bored. You're not like, oh, I've seen this storyline before. Maybe sometimes when it's like, okay, here's another omnipotent alien who is controlling everything.
That did happen a lot in the original series.
But, then you get Q in The Next Generation, which is a new angle on that. And some people hate him, but I happen to like him.
I love Q, actually. I think Q is fantastic.
What if you like the all...
Yeah. What if you couldn't just MacGuffin your way out of the omnipotent being? What if he's a recurring problem? Yeah. And he's kind of charming sometimes about being a problem.
Yeah.
That's what I like about Lower Decks when they deal with another evil computer that's taken over society. And, at the end of that episode, they show they just have a giant, jail full of these, computers that they're just isolated, but there's so many of them. They just keep them all in, one place. Mm-hmm. And they all just start, yelling at each other because they're all,
Several societies have led to the point of being ruled by an evil computer.
Yeah. And they have, protocols for it. They're like, all right, so this is what's going on? Okay. And it's, it's funny. So, I think we've talked just all over the place about Star Trek.
Yes. It is one of those things that it's such a wide net. Focusing in on a single thing is possible, sure, but there's always something else I want to talk about with this topic.
Well, it's been a year. I think we've all seen some more Trek than last. We've talked about how much Star Trek's impacted us, but let's add on to that. Has it changed for any of you? Has it evolved? Has it devolved? Has it gone awry? Has it gone straight? How has it impacted you guys?
I think mostly since I've been watching the newer shows, and as I said at the beginning of this, I haven't enjoyed them as much. I'm still on the fence about a lot of them. But what that has done is that has made me look back at the older shows and like, why do I feel that these are different? What is it that I liked about the older shows? And can I find it in the new shows? If it's missing, why is it missing? Analyzing it like that. And just that closer inspection of it has allowed me to see things that I didn't see upon first viewing, of just how they're actually dealing with these philosophical, ethical, and moral questions, how they develop characters, how they show respect, especially between people, and how it's earned, how it's lost. And I think has been very, very enlightening. Not so much something new, but understanding why something is good on a deeper level. Because you can look at the relationship between Picard and Riker and be like, that's a good relationship. There's a lot of support there. There's a lot of respect there. They have very, very different personalities, and yet they are complementary. But then you can be like, okay, but why? How did they get to that point? Look at the early episodes. They don't have that type of a relationship. The first time they interact with each other, Picard even just kind of like throws Riker this challenge, detach and reattach the saucer from the Enterprise without the guidance computer. And Riker's like, why? And just do it. And there's no explanation given. And so there's this very almost adversarial, like, I need to test you, you need to prove yourself to me. But over the episodes, they become very good friends, and they can build on the trust of being thrown into situations so much that they can rely on each other. So seeing the steps of that and understanding how these sorts of bonds are made is the biggest impact for me of late in the last year.
To build on that, I would say Discovery does that as well, taking it from where she's completely thrown in jail for her actions. So she has to gain the respect of not only her crew, but whatever's left of Star Trek. So over the years, it's interesting to see her grow and forge relationships. And her first Saru, the alien, that relationship is really great. It's one of those that grew. And I really like that. And it's wrapped in, all the newer tech, because it's 50 years later from the original show, so everything is really cool looking. But that whole core, too, okay, you're on a ship. You have to work together, and all these crazy storylines and the ethics involved. And I just think they really continue to do that, and they do it really well. So I would say that I've grown with that, and I'd love to see it continue, see it different in different ways. Now we have women and African American and LGBTQ, aliens of all kinds of craziness, and how do you deal with that in a society? Because now you're a society, you're living on a ship together, and I love the fact they do that, and it's made me I've had to think. I've been doing this for 50 years. 50 years ago, I didn't feel the same way as I do now. And this has all been part of my growth as watching them grow.
I don't know, in the last year for me, I feel like I have interacted with Star Trek in one of two ways. I turn off my brain and I watch Lower Decks, and it's a fun old brain time. Or I feel like I come home and I watch an old episode that I really like, or one that I've completely forgotten. And that's kind of where I exist. I don't really exist so much in modern Star Trek. I think this is true for like a lot of franchises, but I love that like it will never go away. Like whatever happens with Star Trek, those old gems, they'll be old gems, and you get to go home to them whenever, and you get to share them with new people. So that's most of my relationship with Star Trek right now, is like getting to introduce people and coming home.
In the past year, it's been an interesting, it's one of those things where I have perhaps been a little too online of late because I see a lot of the rather obnoxious ends of the fandom. You know, we have a lot of people lately who are saying, oh, Star Trek's gone too woke, and I feel like, how are these people fans of the original show? The whole point was, you know, unity and togetherness, and it's been an interesting thing to just sort of see these people, you know, it's media in general in the past few years has had a bit of an unfortunate toxic undertone, and it has been kind of nice to just watch other Trekkies just sort of rail on these people like, are you joking? You know, it's been a kind of fascinating feeling that.
Personally, I think just sitting down to watch, you know, because they release it week after week, new episode, every time just watching it, however far back behind I am, doesn't matter, just watch that episode. And a lot of times I feel better. I feel like more uplifted, you know, I get this sense of, because I'll watch Star Wars at the same time, but it's different, you know. In Star Wars, yeah, it'd be fun to fly a spaceship and, you know, blow up Imperial TIE fighters or whatever. But watching Star Trek is like, no, I think I would be pleased as punch to sit there recalibrating something on the starship, just as long as I'm visiting, you know, new worlds on Starfleet sounds so appealing.
Yeah. And
I think, like, I don't know if I can, like, live my life like I would if I was, you know, as if I were a Starfleet person. But, you know, it's an optimistic and fun, just, it's a happy place is on a Federation starship.
Yeah, as long as you're not under one of those admirals.
At this point, I'd love to be under California class, because they are having fun, and no one respects them.
I kind of want to know. So obviously all of us have seen many, many, many episodes of different kinds of Star Trek. Does anybody... I really just want to know people's favorite episodes. I feel like everybody has a...
I think this is one of the questions that the answer will change depending on the mood or, you know, when you're asking it. Because for most of my life, it would definitely be one Data episode or another. I have always really loved Data. He's always been my favorite. And I still hold to that. He's still my favorite. I find him very relatable, very funny. However, the episode that came to mind as you said that is actually from Voyager. And I won't remember the name of the doctor they used, but there is a character who is fused to a facehugger, basically. It's something else, but it's the same sort of thing. And so the doctor creates a hologram of the best doctor who would know how to help in that situation. And it is a Cardassian doctor who, unbeknownst to the person who wrote the program, unbeknownst to the doctor, this Cardassian gained his knowledge via very cruel and inhumane experiments. So the question then becomes, can you use the information that he has? Because the doctor and this hologram get along quite well until they find out about his past. And the hologram is like, that wasn't even me. Mm. I was created by you based off of files that didn't include that information, because that wasn't public knowledge that I create, that the guy I'm based off of did them. So I didn't do anything unethical. I know this information, so I am just free information for you. But the doctor is like, it wasn't free information. It might be free now, but how did it become free? And so there becomes a question of, can you use this person's information to save a life when it costs so many lives to get that information? So I really enjoyed that episode. And they don't give an answer at the end. They obviously have the characters decide what they're going to do, but they don't say, and that was the right answer.
I mean,
and they were good.
That's very common in Voyager, that it's like, this is the answer we're choosing. Yeah. Is this correct? Nah, I don't know. It's the solution for right now.
I'd have to say, off the top of my head, one of my favorite episodes is the Deep Space Nine, where they go back in time to the Tribble.
Oh, yeah!
Such a fun...
It's so much fun. And
that is a fun
And the best part is when they ask Worf, why the Klingons? And he just says, we don't talk about that. It's just wonderful. It's just, and it's a good episode too, but it's that one always stands.
Yeah.
I love that one.
Well, there's two that come to mind fairly immediately. They're both Deep Space Nine episodes, not particularly surprisingly for me. The first one is, it's very Quark-focused. There's a group of Cardassians who are essentially war criminals to Cardassia. They are actively against Cardassia's war policies, and they're considered treasonous. And Quark has a past with that. I guess she's technically their leader. That the other three are like children that she is just trying to smuggle away from Cardassia. And it plays out kind of like Casablanca in a lot of ways, oddly enough. And it's just a really interesting look at both Cardassians who are against Cardassia's rule and just Quark, trying to, both in traditional fashion, trying to profit off of this while also trying to help somebody he does clearly care about. The other one is a bit more, again, not surprising. It's more focused on Odo and his past. And it's the episode where Garak tries to blow up his own shop to force Odo to investigate this other thing that happened in the past. And we get a lot of information about Kira's backstory as well as Odo's history in that episode and how those two kind of met and know each other. It's a pretty fascinating look at both of them.
Well, I've been trying to think about it, and the worst part about this is probably, like, the three answers that come to my mind are all Ferengi episodes.
The Ferengi are fantastic.
I love Ferengi.
They're
fun.
I was not sure about them at all in Next Generation.
No, they didn't really find their voice until Deep Space Nine, I feel.
Exactly, because there's the episode where they take Nog to Earth and end up in the 1950s.
Yes!
That episode's amazing. There's the one where Rom unionizes, which is also amazing. But probably the one I'd say was my favorite is actually a Lower Decks episode from season 2 with Ferengis and the Mugatu?
Yes, the
gorilla things?
Mugatu. They're ape-like creatures with horns.
I don't want to spoil how the episode ends because it has because the ending of it is. Watching this, it absolutely cements why I love that show so much, because the answer to it, how they get out of this predicament, is so Star Trek. It's so, hey, let me stop myself before I actually get into it, but it's just something that's like, you know what?
This third option we didn't really elaborate on previously.
Exactly. They're given they've got to do this, and then they don't. They do something entirely different, but makes so much sense that it's like, yeah, why... This is the answer.
This is how you deal with Ferengi.
This is how you deal with problems, exactly. And it's also a really funny episode. I just love it.
Fun episode.
And it's Boimler and Rutherford just doing stuff, and I love those guys. I love all of them.
Oh yeah, mine.
Yeah, you gotta go.
I was hoping nobody would take it, and nobody did. Which we're gonna have the same episode, whatever. But. It has to be, and it sticks in my head. I can't remember details because I can't remember details. But the Voyager episode, which has basically no Voyager characters except for the Doctor playing themselves, where the Doctor is found on a hard drive at this museum, and it's basically this museum figuring out that their entire history is a lie, and kind of the ethics of the truth, and thinking critically about what you think that you know. And there's a lot about that corresponds with libraries and information. I love that episode. It's all Doctor. It's campy versions of all the characters. I love a lot about that episode.
I forgot about that. That is a good one.
That is a fun one.
I mean, all these episodes are good.
Yeah, there are a lot.
That's the thing. Is
that's a hard question.
I know, but I feel like there's something, an image in your mind, and I just wanted to know what sticks with other people.
We covered a couple of favorites here. And in the previous year's episode, I know we did very specifically favorite character. We've talked about favorite doctors. I seem to be the only dissenting voice on that particular topic. But what about the captains?
I do know, just as I know, Laura would agree with you. when I started watching Deep Space Nine. She's like, "You'll love Dr. Bashir," and so far that hasn't turned out true. But so she would agree with you.
Good. I'm glad somebody else is on my side on that one.
Well, I'm just gonna go out. I'm just gonna go right and say it. Favorite captain, Pike. Yeah. Strange New Worlds has turned me on to him. I love him. I love his character. I love his attitude. He's got a lot of charisma. All the other captains, they all have their thing. I love what they're doing with Pike. I think he's great.
I'm very tempted to say Pike as well. I'm going to say a little bit of an odd one as a proviso. Ultimately, I'm going to say Picard. I know that's kind of one of the classic. I guess all of them are kind of classic.
Yeah, at this point.
So, Picard. But I will say, as a little stipulation, Lorca from Discovery, what he was supposed before a certain event happened, and again, I'm trying to say things without saying things. They set him up as a certain type of captain, and then later on you review something else. What they set him up as would have been my favorite captain. What ended up happening was not my favorite captain. In fact, I really, really do not like what happened with that character. It was very disappointing. But first off, played by Jason Isaacs, so that goes a long way. He was kind of like, in my opinion, like the perfect blend of a no-nonsense military professional that you would expect from a captain, while still having really high charisma and just a likable guy. Like, he would be very strict and said, this is how things have to be done. This is the letter of the law. We have to uphold these rules. But then he could also turn and crack a joke with you and just, make you feel at ease and comfortable, despite being very strict and organized. So I really, really liked how he was. As it is, I'll go with Picard because I think he also really embodies that. He has a very strong sense of order and of structure, and as somebody who is captaining a ship, I think those are really important leadership qualities. He knows how things should be done, and he does them as best as he could. He keeps the chain of command strong, but he doesn't let it rule him. He doesn't just order people around and say, no, I'm the captain, you have to do what I say. I mean, sometimes he does do that when he has to, but he hears people's advice, he is friendly with people, he gets them to respect him genuinely, and he doesn't force their respect.
I'm going to say Janeway. And I kept thinking about it, and I'm trying to articulate it in my brain, and I think the reason, because I know it is not unpopular to dislike Janeway. I feel like some people do not like Janeway, or feel like she might be a little inconsistent or something. Some people have issues about Voyager. I really like Janeway. I feel like Janeway had an incredibly hard job, and I don't know, I love how human she is. I love that she feels like a real person, and she gets angry when she doesn't have her coffee in the morning. I don't know, I feel like we saw a lot of the humanity with her, and I think some of that has to do with her being fundamentally alone, the top of a ship without any help or structure or resources, when you got to worry about getting to where you're going to go. So yeah, Janeway.
I was just sitting here trying to think about them. When Alex was talking about Discovery, I thought, and this is probably just me, the very beginning of Discovery, Michelle Yeoh is the captain.
It's a hard act to follow.
And, about 10 minutes. And then she becomes something else, too, that you wouldn't
She's
like.
great for the 10 minutes.
But, so I would go there. But
the first 10 minutes.
But
10-minute captain.
But it's interesting, the captain, because I would say Picard, Sisko, and then Janeway starts, kind of in the same way, but becomes more human. Picard and Sisko are decision makers and, very strong characters. I think Kirk and Michael Burnham are closer because they are out-of-the-box thinkers. Mm-hmm. They just go with their gut and eventually tell everybody, nope, we're doing it my way. And they go off. And I love all that scenario. And so it's really kind of hard. But I think maybe because Janeway goes sort of in that between, I do like her and I appreciate where she is. And I love the fact that she talks to Leonardo da Vinci.
Yeah.
That seals it.
I will say, just emphasizing what you said, it is hard. I'm not ever going to be like, oh, that's your favorite captain? Well, you chose wrong.
Yeah, you'd have to pick somebody that's like somebody that's like on screen for 12 seconds. In theory, I guess, like, also, like, Nog canonically becomes a captain at some point, but we don't see him as a captain.
Yeah.
Sulu is technically captain. I think of the main, of the show-running captains, let's say, I would personally have to go with Sisko. There's just something about his particular brand of no-nonsense, and he kind of is the necessary sort of leader, because he's dealing not just with military people, but with people like Quark, who is just actively trying to undermine him at any turn, and,
And he's a dad.
Yeah. We get to see how he... we get to see how he captains, we get to see his parenting method. We get to see a lot of him as a person, which is really kind of fun.
Debatably also a prophet.
Yeah, briefly, we also kind of do get to see him as a deity, so there's that got a little weird, admittedly, at the end there. But
actually, as weird as I want to say, like, that's exclusive to Sisko, I think that has happened to several captains as well.
These things do kind of keep happening. Omnipotent beings just keep popping up, but like, I think the moment that cements it for me with Sisko is he built what was essentially the spaceship equivalent of a sloop that was an ancient Bajoran model that, like, they used to navigate the stars pre-warp, essentially. And he spent, like, months of the show building it and then actually takes his son out on what is essentially a sailboat ride in space on a sailboat he built. And I'm just like, this is a dude that has managed to keep the reins while having a very rich life for himself. And I really enjoyed that about him.
It's like Space Jethro Gibbs.
Basically.
Yeah, yes.
What are we doing now?
Well, you can be that person. All right, well, I think that's gonna wrap us up for this installment. Final thoughts, anybody, on Star Trek? Anything you'd want to bring up? It's good.
It's good. I mean, that's a good final thought. It is still fantastic.
Keep him coming.
Yeah. I feel like I spent a lot of my important years with a dearth of Star Trek, and it's just popping up everywhere. I don't have time to watch it all.
It is kind of nice to be back at that.
Fan.
Yeah, because it is like, that was a thing, because when I was a kid, I was still getting new episodes of Next Generation and Deep Space Nine and Voyager all at the same time, basically. And it's kind of fun to have that feeling again, where it's like, no, there's always new Star Trek.
Well, that's gonna about do us for this episode of the Geek Out podcast here at the Lansdowne Library. If you are interested in coming and geeking out with us, Jeff, where can they sign up?
Well, you can, of course, come into the library and sign up in person, but you can also sign up at lansdownelibrary.org/podcasts. There will be a green Register Here button. You can click that out and fill out a small little form, and we'll get back to you soon.
Thank you for listening.
Well, live long and prosper, I suppose, is the only appropriate closeout.